All right, here we go.
Here we
Ready
go.
to go.
We're live.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm James Brody from College Treasure. Tonight, I'm very excited to have with us Keirsten Sires, who's the CEO of twodays.com. It's a website focused on rating colleges, college coaches, and helping you with the college recruiting process. Keirsten, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And now, so you were a former two-sport athlete in college. You went to Skidmore. I believe you played, is it soccer and tennis?
Yes, correct.
So I guess that was the impetus for you starting this. Was it your own experience that led you to start this website, or was it hosting students as recruits when they were on campus? What caused you to start this, the twodays.com?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit of both technically, but I would say more so my personal experience as far as just the college athletic recruiting process, not really turning into what I was pitched when I finally got to the school. So I was a recruited tennis player. I played my first year of tennis, and by the end of the year, I wasn't happy at all. So after the season was over, I decided to quit, and then I was a walk-on for soccer for my last 3 years, which is the best decision for me. I loved my soccer coach, and through that whole process and that whole experience, I just realized that there's just really no power in the situation for recruiting overall. So there's no information really out there that helps high school athletes and parents really see the inner workings of what a team or a coach who's running the program or athletic department is really all about. Recruiting process is short, it's fast, everything's kind of getting thrown at you. You have a lot of other things going on. So people don't really have enough time to get to know, the situation as much as they maybe want to. So this was our way of kind of coming through and saying, hey, you know what? There needs to be a little bit more power to the student athlete, to the family. They're making most of the time, even though everybody thinks that everyone gets a full ride scholarship to play sports. It's not true. So you're dealing with an extremely costly process, and everything is just so expensive when it comes to college. So we want to help make that process better.
That's great. Now, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you could give a prospective college athlete?
I would say just making sure that you do your research, ask a ton of questions. When you're on your recruiting trip, check out the roster, do everything that you possibly can do throughout the recruiting process to just make sure that you have as much information as possible. There's nothing more in this world that is more important, in my opinion, because you can't always go based off the word of one or two people. You might be a goalie and joining a team that already has 4 other goalies. You don't really know that until you do the research, you ask the questions, and you're really diving into that whole process. And I mean, my second part is, which you know how I feel about this, is make sure that you pick the college for the college and not for the sport.
Right. Now, I think a lot of students think that, oh, if I'm good enough, the colleges are going to find me. And they don't realize how they really have to get out. I guess if you're a good enough football player, basketball player, those are moneymakers for the colleges, right? So they're going to find you. But the D3 schools and even lower level D1 and the D2 schools, a lot of times you need to market yourselves to those schools. So when do you recommend that students start reaching out to college programs?
Yeah, I mean, there's rules based around it, obviously, but there's never any time where there's a situation where the athlete is ever going to get in trouble, right? So you could start reaching out at any point, just get in those inboxes. And then with D3, there's no rules with that. A coach can respond at any time. So even if a coach can't respond, doesn't mean that they're not reading emails and not seeing you throughout the years and showing your vested interest. So I would say as early as you know that you are interested in a program, start to reach out, know that they might not be able to respond. But just make sure that you're going through the process and you're being proactive about it.
Now, how would you recommend that they reach out initially? So are you saying email, I guess, call? I mean, do you recommend going if a school has a camp a summer camp, what are some of your tips to students on how best to reach out?
I would say definitely emailing is big. I would call schools that you're very interested in. So like your top 3 schools. I don't think you want to call every single school. My personal opinion. I know other people have different opinions about that, but email, online questionnaire. So the recruiting questionnaire form online on the athletics website is huge, just so they have an organizational like chart of everything. And then I would say, as far as the camps are concerned, it depends, right? Like those are also expensive if you have to travel, stay overnight, do all these things. So I would go to camps where you've already spoken to the coach and had a conversation. Or if you're like, you know what, I really want to play for the school, I want the coach to notice me, maybe pick 1 or 2 camps as far as those are concerned, or ones in your area or something like that. But I don't think that you need to travel to, 10, 15 different camps all over the country and spend a ton of money on those, because those can kind of add up as far as just time and money is concerned.
Great advice. Now, I know the real bread and butter of your website is the coach evaluations, but you also have a recruiting guide for students on there, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a DIY recruiting guide, so kind of do-it-yourself process. We believe that everybody going through the recruiting process can kind of at least jumpstart it on their own. Reaching out to college coaches and doing the research shouldn't necessarily cost you anything as far as that's concerned. And I think, our guide, the reason that I wanted to start it was because of that. And it just lays out steps. Now, we don't say step 1, step 2, step 3, because with recruiting, there's a misconception of, oh, if I follow these things, this will happen. You never know what's going to happen. Program could get cut, coach could get fired, a coach could quit. We just saw with LSU, the whole team can enter the transfer portal. So, there's a lot of things that are happening all at the same time. At different times. Sometimes, there might be parts of the recruiting process that happen earlier than other parts. So there's a general made it a flow of where we think you should kind of naturally get pulled, but by no means does it mean that you have to follow these very rigid steps.
Great. Now, I guess every sport is different, right? And that, like, if you're running, they don't need to see video of you. You can look at a time. I ran track in college, and so that was pretty straightforward. You either run a time or you don't, right? But a lot of the sports, the coaches like to see video. Are there any recommendations you have for, how to, are there websites that students should be using to put their video out, or do you think how would you advise a student who's in a sport that they may need to send video to the colleges?
Yeah, I think, keep it under, definitely keep it under 5 minutes, but I would say keep it more around 3, put your best plays up front, and make sure that you're showing versatility as far as I'm concerned, because a lot of times athletes go into college sports and then they end up being a different position. Now, not true in all cases, obviously, but just by sheer numbers, you end up probably having to play a different position at some point during your college career, which is fine. So I would say show versatility, show that you can kind of, not just score goals, but you could get those assists in and do all that type of stuff. And then as far as, accessibility these days is great, right? So you could easily film it on your phone, Android, iPhone, tablet, whatever you have, you could film it there. You could chop it up on iMovie. I would make sure that you don't have music in there that has any swears or any vulgar language. You don't even necessarily have to have music. There's some coaches like it, some coaches don't. I don't think it's really that important. Maybe including a quick intro of yourself in the beginning. Make sure you're titling it with your first and last name, your graduation year, maybe what high school you go to, because they're seeing a lot of these, right? So they got to keep them organized somehow. You don't want them to have to be doing that extra work. And then I would say, once you get that clip up, either, if you want to go the totally free route, post it on YouTube. And then kind of right now, Twitter's really hot for sharing highlight tapes and getting coaches' attentions, DMs. You could always use a social media route. Of course, sending that in the emails is super important. So make sure that you're linking that either in the YouTube or dropping the actual video directly. I would probably go towards the YouTube link, just so you could actually get the email out. The attachment might be too big. But I think those are like the top high level tips that I have.
Now, you mentioned like if you're going to email coaches, do you think students should start a separate email address just in case? I know sometimes people have like a nickname or something. Do you recommend they start a special email for the recruiting process, the college admissions process, or do you think that's not really necessary?
I think it depends on the person, right? Depends on what your email is. And it also depends on how organized you are, right? Because you can make different folders, you could do all these different types of things now. But if you have a clean email and you feel like you're organized, I don't think it's totally necessary. But if you feel like you want to be more organized or have a more professional email, then starting a secondary one obviously is at no cost. So why not? But what I will say is make sure that your parents' name isn't included in the email. Make sure your parents aren't signing off. Of course, it's okay to have your parents spell check and read through and make sure your grammar is okay and everything. But for the most part, for 95% of this, you should be the one doing the contacting and everything else, because it will be a red flag to a college coach if you have a parent reaching out on your behalf.
Now, you read my mind. That was my next question that I have written down here was who should contact the coach? The parent and the student. And I know I've heard coaches say, we're recruiting the athlete, right? They want to know that the student, and they want to see initiative, right? Best athletes are aggressive. They want the kid being the one who's reaching out. I think you and I have similar views on college athletics, in that at least I look at athletics as a way to get the best education you can, right? It's a lever. The people who are accepted to Ivy League schools at the highest rate are recruited athletes, right? And so you want to use that, and you want to make sure you're fitting in, right? It has what you need academically and athletically. But how can you tell, or how can a student tell what level they can play at in college? Whether they should be reaching out to D1, D2, or D3 schools, or NAIA schools.
Yeah. So, I think that there's a school for everybody. There are plenty of teams out there that are really looking for roster spots and only have 5 kids on their basketball team because the recruiting budget's not there. And then there's a kid that probably could play at that school that just thought, oh, I'm not going to go D1, so I'm not going to play. People get discouraged a little bit too quickly, in my opinion. And there's also the D1 or bust mentality. Now, I think there's more awareness more so now than ever, as far as just the difference between these colleges and the level of play and everything else. Like, you take the best D1 school in any sport and the best D3 school in any sport, that D1 team is going to win every single time. Of course, that when you're talking about the top in each division, that's just, it is what it is. Okay. Now, I'm a D3 athlete and we played a D1 school and we beat that D1 school, but we're not talking about the top, 20 schools in each division. We're talking about the taper off after that. And I think there's a lot of kids who prioritize different things throughout the recruiting process. So some people are more concerned with going to a higher academic school. Some people want to go to a big football school. Some people want to go to a party school, whatever it may be. And that's just the nature of life, of course. But when it comes to the other divisions, or going to junior college for 2 years, getting your associate's degree, and then transferring into a 4-year institution to get that bachelor's degree to save money or to get better on the field or whatever it may be, there's no right or wrong path. I think a lot of times people get caught up in, I have to have all these scholarship offers, I have to have this, I have to have that. And at the end of the day, nobody really cares about your scholarship offers. You're the one that has to go through the whole process. You're the one that has to pick the school that has to be on your resume for the rest of your life. And you're the one that has to live with it. So I would say, first and foremost, make sure that all the decisions you're making are for you and not for other people. And then, of course, make sure you keep your options open, because there might be a school out there that you're sleeping on that maybe is the perfect fit for you.
It's great. It's getting the right school for the student, right, where they fit in and they feel comfortable. You talked a little bit about scholarships. Do you want to go into that? Like, a lot of times I think people think they need to get an athletic scholarship, but it's a very small percentage of students who actually get especially a full scholarship that's outside of football and basketball. Well, if you want to talk about that, and then where you can't give scholarships at D3 schools, but a lot of times they can almost come up with as good of a package as if you were getting an athletic scholarship somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things, right? There's grants. I mean, I know, of course, I know Ivy League's D1, but you can't get a scholarship, an athletic scholarship to an Ivy League institution. But I know multiple students who have been granted or gifted the money from alumni or whatever it may be. Now, it's not technically an athletic scholarship because they don't allow those. So it's not the same category, but there's a lot of different rules around things, is all I'll say. But when it comes to scholarships, and I'm not going to speak directly on the numbers, scholarshipstats.com is like the best resource in my opinion. They just dive into like ratios, percentage chance of getting a scholarship, percentage chance of being on a roster. And they're not just talking about NCAA, they're talking about all of college athletics, and then they'll break it down by NCAA and D1, D2, D3, and everything else. Now, each sport is going to be different about this. There's Title IX rules. There's, things as far as just budgets and how important it is to a school. And, football players are most likely going to have more opportunity to get scholarships because they're the ones with the TV contracts bringing in the money, all these different things, which then cuts on a lot of other men's sports scholarships because of Title IX, but that benefits women's sports. So it's a whole big cycle. But I go back to my original point of make sure you're doing the research, because you might be saying my kid's going to get a full ride scholarship to a sport that doesn't even offer full ride scholarships, if that makes sense.
Right. I know a lot of them, I ran track. I think I'm not sure what it is now. I think they have 12 scholarships for a track team where you need 40 to 50 people, right, to put together a track team. So usually if you got a scholarship, and I went to a school that didn't offer scholarships, but a lot of times it would be a quarter scholarship, right? And I believe that's right. The minimum they could give. So that's good advice, right, to know not to necessarily be looking for that full scholarship, because unless you're going to be an All-American in a lot of the non-revenue sports, you're not likely to get a full scholarship.
Right.
So I know one of the features on your website is recruiting horror stories. So what's your best advice that you can give to high school students or their parents who are listening now so they can avoid being a feature on your recruiting horror stories?
Yeah, I'm going to say again, and I know I said this earlier, really like parents, of course, you have to be there to support and be there for your kid and everything else. I mean, I have a daughter, so it's like, I get it. You want to make sure that you are there to support and help your kid through everything in life. But when it comes to reaching out to coaches or going to games, make sure you're not punching refs in the face. One of the recruiting horror stories on our face, true story. Make sure you're not contacting and accepting scholarship offers on behalf of your student athlete. Another true story. Make sure that you're just letting your kid do the communicating. It's fine to guide them. It's fine to advise them, but just make sure that it's coming from them and make sure that you're not punching people in the face.
Seems like a low bar, but
yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Shockingly, it's not a low bar, but
yes, exactly.
And I think that's great advice, and it's something I tell parents, right? That kids aren't always that organized, especially I would say more on the high school boys than the high school girls, but high school girls can also sometimes use help with the organization. So that's a great way for parents to be involved in the process, right? It's helping to organize it and keeping them on task. Do you know that you've mentioned it, obviously the two-a-days.com, you mentioned scholarshipstats.com. Are there any other websites that you recommend to students who are looking through the recruiting process? And it could be, I know sometimes it's like for specific sports have a really, a website that a lot of the coaches will go to that one website. I forget if wrestling was Intermat maybe, and there's, I'm not sure if you have any others that you recommend.
Yeah, there are a ton. I don't know them all off the top of my head as far as just sports specific, but pretty much the niche sports or the non-revenue sports usually always have some sort of really, like, I know for tennis, tennisrecruiting.net is one that's out there. Parenting Aces, Lisa does a great podcast for tennis athletes and parents as well. So I think, you're going to be able to find those avenues. I would start by looking at like what podcasts and blogs are out there. But I think, like I mentioned, scholarshipstats.com. I mean, you just learn so much from that website, and it gets really, really sports specific on that. And like I said, down to the division. So that's definitely one that I would totally check out. Parenting Aces, like I said, for tennis. And then other than that, I mean, if you have a coach in your life that's a club coach, a high school coach, a youth sports coach, somebody that at least knows a little bit about recruiting, it's always good to kind of ask them, hey, what are the top websites that are kind of popular for recruiting? And having those conversations, I think, are super important because, like we mentioned, recruiting's super overwhelming. Nobody is saying that it's this easy, breezy thing that you go through. It's very fast, it's very intense, it's very time consuming. Like, it's just like exhausting at the end of the day. You go through this a couple of years, you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to pick a school already. So I think just making sure that you're being patient and weighing all your options is another thing that's just important. But doing the research and finding those resources is, again, something that's super important.
Now, what are some of the favorite features of your website that you think that parents and students, I guess students first, can use in the recruiting process?
Yeah, I think parents and students could definitely use the ratings, right? Okay, so diving into coach ratings, staff ratings, and campus visits, and then also facilities. So just trying to get a full picture of what the school is really like from the perspective of the student athletes, I think, is super important. The DIY guide, and then the blog. Our blog, we kind of tackle everything for parents, questions that parents should ask, advice from parents whose kids have already played in college, things like the recruiting horror stories, or diving into scholarships, or what's happening with the NCAA right now and what current student athletes are upset about. What are things that are happening? What are things that are changing? NCAA is always changing rules. They're always changing how they view things. Although they're slow in some areas, they're fast in other areas. Name, image, and likeness just popping up. Your kid can now make money from being a college athlete. How awesome is that? They could run a camp over the summer and, put it towards their tuition. There's so many things that are happening right now. So I would say the blog is definitely another really great place to just like start consuming that recruiting content.
How have you seen the NIL, the name, image, and likeness? How has that changed the recruiting process, or is it still too early?
So I think it's changed it a lot, but my issue is what's being reported is the top 1% of athletes. So you hear a lot of it from, Nick Saban's perspective, or, whatever big coaches are out there, their perspectives, which they're valid in having their perspectives because their athletes are definitely making, obviously, the millions of dollars. But that level is going to be different from somebody who played D3 tennis or D1 track and field and cross country, because for people like us, where there was really an injustice with this, was people there was a baseball player who was a college baseball player. He went through brain cancer, wrote a book about it, then had to either take the book off the shelves or quit his sport because the name, image, and likeness was impacted. Now, he knew he wasn't going to be a professional baseball player. So it's like, you're missing out on all these things, or kids starting companies or being influencers or YouTube videos. And kids weren't able to monetize these things. And again, I get that there's a whole set of issues with the high revenue driving, high visibility sports. But when we're talking about the rest of the 98% of kids, I think it's great. I don't necessarily, again, think that you should be making your full final decision on just a sport or just your name, image, and likeness program and what the school has for you. I think it's always school first. You go there to get a degree. So I think those are just things to consider, but that's what kids have been considering. And I think, if you just look at the deals from the NCAA tournament with everything happening, St. Peter's school just like kind of blowing up because of their success. And, you know,
Right.
their main basketball player, whose name slipped my mind, but, you know, he had NIL deals basically overnight. And that's great. It's what a great opportunity for him to market himself that way while he can. So I think, you know, it's definitely changed it, but it's going to be at different levels at the
Yeah.
end of the day.
And I think you're right that it was needed for some of the lower tier sports, right, where you couldn't teach lessons, right? Use your name and say you were a college athlete in order to teach tennis lessons over the summer in the past. So there are little things like that that definitely, yeah, you miss because you're hearing all the big $1 million contracts that the top athletes are signing.
And women's sports were really pulling through. Like there's been some really impressive numbers for women's sports, because everybody was just saying, oh, it's just going to be only football, basketball players. Like, no, there's been a ton of other athletes who have been really with some awesome deals. And I love to see it personally.
Yeah, no, I know at UConn, Paige Beckers has signed some good
Yeah,
deals.
yeah,
And
yeah.
actually, I'm a state legislator, and one of the bills we may be voting on this week is modifying our NIL laws for the state of
Oh, really?
Connecticut.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's something to do with UConn. They didn't want to be disadvantaged relative to other states and what they could do in the in the deal. So
Gotcha.
it is definitely it's a new landscape for that. So what is the best piece of advice that you think if you could only give a high school student, high school junior now who's thinking that he or she wants to play college sports, what's the best thing you could tell them right now?
I would say just keep an open mind. And I know that's easier said than done. And there's still people that are going to hear me say this and think that they're going to, and then still try and veer towards the best deal and offer that they could get. But you'd be surprised at how helpful financial aid packages could be, how helpful grants could be, how helpful, you know, just even academic scholarships could be. So I would say make sure that you're just keeping an open mind, and not pigeonholing yourself to a specific institution, or just a specific grouping of them, because you just never know where life's going to take you. And you might really need to take a deep look and say, hey, do I want to be a 4-year starter, possibly All-American on a team that is maybe D3, or do I want to be riding the bench on a team like University of Alabama and win a ring? Neither one of those is bad. They're both
Right.
great. You're still a college athlete in either
Yeah.
situation. But you know, I think just realizing what it is that you want from your experience, is really important.
Great. Keirsten, thank you so much. Again, the
Thank you.
website's two-a-days.com. I don't know if you have any parting advice. Obviously, I just asked you what was the best piece of advice. So if there's anything else that you forgot, or any other features of your site that you think that the students should check out.
I would say just, you know, follow us on socials. And if you have questions, we're always there to answer. And we're not charging anything for that either. It's just, we're here to help, and we want to make sure, you know, you could go on the blog, comment if you have a question, do whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's on the blog, whether it's on socials, and just ask us questions, and we'll answer them as best we can.
Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.